All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Oliver Marood. I'm one of the founders of the Whisky List, and tonight I'm joined by Emma Cookson, our whisky specialist. Hi, Emma.
Hi.
And David Legoff from the Whisky Show as well is joining this tasting. He's the one who's put this wonderful kit together at home with his wonderful packing capability. Hopefully everyone's tasting kits have arrived in time. Our apologies on behalf of Australia Post. I think everyone's feeling the pinch at the moment with uncertainty in delivery times, but yeah, we record all tastings, so that's on our YouTube channel, and after this tasting, most likely tomorrow, I'll drop a link to everyone, the link to the YouTube if you want to watch it. And yeah, please put on your cameras if you haven't. It's always good to see some familiar faces and the reactions to the whiskey. We encourage lots of comments, feedback, tasting notes, questions. There's no question that we shouldn't ask as long as it's whiskey related at some capacity. If we can't answer the question, we will Google it and then we'll give you the answer that way. Don't drink and drive. There's some higher ABV whiskies here. For those at home, the walk from the living room to the bedroom, the common spiel there. Water or ice, personal preference. If you want to add a couple of drops of water to lower that ABV, that's always encouraged if it's a little bit too strong. And I think that's it. Yeah, please put your questions in. I've just kept everyone muted for the time being for background noise. We'll aim to stick to about 45 minutes to 1 hour tonight's tasting, and otherwise I might hand it over to Emma, who's going to be running the tasting tonight. Emma, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome. All right. Get my screen up for everyone. So what we're all here for is obviously the World Whiskies Award. Now, I don't want you guys to wait too long before we tuck into the first one. So I'll share with you the kind of the run schedule for tonight, which ones will be drinking in which order, and these are the awards that each bottling has won. So grab your Taiwanese whiskey, your Kavalan Podium, as your first one. But yeah, I've saved the one we're all really here for, the Glen Alecky, until the middle. So you're gonna have to bear with me for that one. But yeah, so obviously Kavalan is one of the more well-known international distilleries, Taiwanese based, belonging to the King Car Company, who make everything, literally everything. They make baby formula, cars, all that kind of stuff. And they petitioned the Taiwanese government and were like, hey, this whiskey thing's kicking off overseas. Let's make whiskey here. So they were like, well, we want to make that too. Why not? Obviously, you're getting that like really incredible STR cask quality to this whiskey, which is from the late Jim Swan, who consulted for the distillery before his passing. But this is super interesting. It's a combination of ex-bourbon refill casks and virgin American oak casks. So I think this is the first virgin oak kind of predominant whiskey that Kavalan's been doing in their expressions. So talk into this one to get us started.
David, I know you love answering this question. Do you mind answering what an STR cask is?
Shaved, toast, and rechar. That's a process, I don't think it was patented, but popularized by Jim Swan, and pretty much all of the distilleries that he's a hand in do it to a less or great extent, such as Kilhoman, Cotswolds, Milk and Honey, Kavalan, probably Penderyn as well. I don't know if Armorik do it. But it's once you get the cask, generally the American oak casks, they shave them, they toast them. So toasting is different to charring, where they put, it's almost like a heating element, the shape of almost a tube that goes into the barrel with the ends off, and it heats it from the inside, and it literally toasts it. So it's like an inside-out toaster, and it's a slow process. And that kind of seals up the pores and things, and then they give it that char with the magnificent open flames that everybody's familiar with, and that obviously prepares the casks the way that that works for them.
Yeah, and by shaving the staves of the barrel down so fine, I've heard stories that at Kavalan the barrel staves are like maybe couple centimeters thick tops, you're really allowing that whiskey to penetrate the wood and all the sugars that are existing in the wood, because that's really what gives it the flavor, and that's what you want out of an STR cask, that like really intense flavor in a short period of time.
Does that mean there's a lot of leaky casks at Kavalan?
No, they not they. What they do is they send their coopers to both to America and to Europe, to Spain, to train on those particular type of casks. Because of there's a question there about aging. Because of the hot climate, the effective maturation is a lot quicker. So they don't use small casks. That's one of Jim Swan's things, is that he was very anti-small cask maturation. So they use, the smallest they use is 200 liters, but because of the hot and humid climate, there's accelerated maturation. So this is generally probably about a 4 to 5 years old, I'd guess. Yeah,
I believe standard kind of Kavalan is around that 5-year age mark. But yeah, it's yeah, it's really interesting. You are always going to get leaky casks, you know, no matter how good you are. But yeah, there's definitely a skill to making sure that you get as much out of it without losing whiskey, precious whiskey.
Now, and maybe someone from the audience might know, when you try and Google the capacity of King Car Distillery, and in terms of how much whiskey they make per year, it was 1.5 at one stage, then 2, then 4. The numbers are all over the place. Does anyone have any idea how big this distillery is? Because it is massive. If you've ever had the chance, go visit. It is insane in terms of the production that they do.
Yeah, when they initially founded the distillery, it was essentially a factory. You know, they weren't ever planning for that craft distillery movement of, you know, we just make a little bit here and there. It was, you know, we are going to make a lot of whiskey. I think they have a similar capacity to a lot of Scottish distilleries. So in that like 1 million liters a year capacity, but you can look it up quickly if you'd like.
it's closer to 10 times that.
Yeah. What is it?
Massive. It's about 10 million.
Yeah.
It's huge. They doubled it in 2 years. They doubled capacity.
Yeah. Yeah, because they've got 12,000 liter wash stills and 7,000 liter spirit stills, and if you're running them every day, that's a lot of liquid.
So is that fair to say what Australia makes in whiskey per year, they do in a week or in a couple of days?
Probably.
Around abouts. Yeah. I think there's a distillery, the guys that make Ned's whiskey are fairly high capacity, but that's probably the biggest in Australia. Yeah, well, since Corio anyway. Yeah.
What's everyone think of the first whiskey? Nodding, thumbs up, hands up if you enjoyed it. There we go.
I'm biased. This is my favorite Kavalan of all time. All the Solus, etc. It's
big call.
Meryl, your friend in the blue shirt, there was a little bit like
Yeah, I think Kavalan's super interesting because it is so intensive, the maturation process. It can be a little bit confronting and a bit overwhelming, I think. Sometimes you just want a whiskey that you're like, I don't want to think too much, I just want to chill. But yeah.
And this is it, yeah.
Marcus asks, what's the ABV on this one?
David, you would have.
It's should be on your little bottles, 46.
Yeah.
Got some great tasting notes from Andreas here. Nose, malt, vanilla, candied citrus, tobacco, peaches, cream, finish, peppery burst, followed by long dark fruits, honey, malt lingering. Mate, you should be writing our tasting notes.
Yeah. That peach note's a really good call. Yeah.
And David Bakes mentioned awesome on the nose and taste is lighter. People at home agree with that?
Sorry, cat clicked my mouse for me.
But
right.
it's interesting that Taiwan's got its own category of World Whiskey Awards, since there's probably 2 distilleries on the whole island.
Yeah.
There's 3 now, I think.
3, okay, yeah, missed one.
But no, Nantu Distillery is really interesting, and they're focusing predominantly on peated whiskey from Taiwan, which is super curious. It's good stuff though. Well, I might hop onto a little bit of a background about the World Whiskey Awards. So obviously, there's awards popping up all over the place all the time for, different types. You've got the Australian Distilling Awards, which is the judging is actually going on right now. A lot of people I know are judging a lot of blind whiskies. But when you're looking at awards on a whiskey bottle, I think it's really important to think about it really critically. So, what are the categories? How do they define the categories? Who's the judging panel? Obviously, you want people who are very experienced in the area. I know that I've seen awards where it's, like, we got some bloke down the street to try it and give us his feedback. But another important thing is sponsors. It's not really something like we think about when we're looking at the little sticker on the bottle, but it's really, really important because it can often influence judging decisions. And there have been awards which are 100% influenced. And the World Whiskey Awards is not one of them, thank the Lord. So the World Whiskey Awards is actually run by a company that specializes in bottle packaging, weirdly enough. So actually most of the sponsors are glassware companies. They're, packaging and bottle manufacturers and stuff like that. So fortunately, there's not a lot of inner workings going on that side. But it is important to note as well that it costs money for all these distilleries to enter these awards. And so I think that, there's so many incredible whiskeys out there that haven't gotten to the awards because they just haven't got the capital to send a couple of 100 bottles of whiskey or whatever it is to Scotland and stuff like that. But yeah, definitely something to consider whenever we're looking at awards. I think it's really important just for, being able to choose whiskey critically. And now that I've gone on a little bit about that, let's go to the next one, the one I'm really excited for, which is the Bunnahabhain 25-year-old. Which is so exciting. All right. So Bunnahabhain Distillery is an Islay distillery in Scotland. They're actually up on the northeast coast, in this small, in the strait between Islay and Jura. It's actually called the Sound of Islay, which is a beautiful name for a body of water. And then right next to the Margadale River, which is where they get their water source from. But Bunnahabhain was a blending whiskey for many, many years of its life. And they didn't come out with a single malt until the 1979, actually. So late 70s, just before the 80s hit. So they're actually really unique on the island because they didn't start making peated whiskey. They made an unpeated spirit. It was predominantly sherry cask because they'd been owned by Edrington Group for a while. And they're very, very well known for using sherry casks. They actually own Macallan and Glenross. So that's kind of the sherry casking policy that was in place at Bunnahabhain a long time ago. But yeah, they came out with a peated spirit in the 90s called Moyne, which absolutely must be said with a Kath and Kim accent. But yeah, so this is really, really cool. And you do often find a lot of older age statement whiskies from Islay, but none that have really had an unpeated style. Bunnahabhain really is like the only one with that big age statement in an unpeated style. And we are starting to see places like Caolila get a little bit more age up there for their unpeated expressions, but this is just absolutely unique stuff. They're very proud of their unpronounceable name. And if you've ever looked at their expressions that they have, equally unpronounceable with Scottish Gaelic. Quite the tongue twisters, but this is one of my favorite distilleries. Yeah, it's just, you get that saltiness, but it's not that overt smokiness. Yeah, so as you can see as well, I've chosen to add the official tasting notes from the judges of the Whiskey Awards. Just thought that they'd be a cool thing for you guys to have a little squiz at, because everyone's different, everyone's flavor palette is different. We've all tried and tasted different things in our lives, and that can all influence how we ourselves taste whiskey and food and all that kind of stuff. So,
We had a question from Dave in the audience. What's the retail price? So the Bunna 25, we like to shorten everything with our Aussie slang, and the Scots.
Funny.
If you ever visit the distillery, just say, can I have a pour of some Bunna, and they'll look at you weird, but it's good fun. $650 plus or minus a few dollars. You can shop around. Just a quick disclosure, I don't know if everyone's seen, but the whiskey list, we've started importing whiskey as well. So Bunnahabhain is one of the brands that we've started importing, and we've brought this bottling, which for the last 3-4 years have been on and off very scarcely available into Australia. So all our stock has been brought into the country, and then we've obviously broken down some tonight to taste, and otherwise, it's gone to about 20 online independent retailers, and they'll be listed on and off our website. So if you're interested in getting one of these for Christmas, this is a Christmas dram for me. This is the thing it reminds me of. It's absolutely delicious. And I think David, actually, they updated their packaging, so we might fancy new package. Open it from the side now. There you go. And to get the bottle out, if you tip it forward, there's a little cap on the top, and you have to tilt it. David, you're muted, by the way, if you're trying to talk.
Technical difficulties.
You got to unmute me. I can't unmute me. I don't get a speaking part. I'm a married man. So it's got this little padlocky thing. So you have to turn it, lift it out, then lift the bottle through, and then out again. So a bit of an IQ test. Difficult after a few drams, but that's how it works.
Yeah, bonus childproofing.
Only children can get into it.
Michael asks, what casks we use in the Bunna 25?
Yeah, so it's predominantly bourbon and Oloroso. When you have like older age whiskies, you don't really want to overexpose them to a really active or like super wet cask, as it were, especially with like sherries, because it can get very tannic and not super pleasant. So yeah, predominantly like refill bourbon casks, and then a little bit of sherry finishing as well.
Tom comments on the packaging, so you don't accidentally drink it at the end of your night if you're drunk. So it's drunk proof.
Self-governing. Yes.
Yep.
And on that note, with the sherry and the bourbon finish, like comparing it with say an Oloroso finished at Glendronach or a Glenfarclas that's only been in Oloroso casks, sometimes the Oloroso is so overbearing that you can't really enjoy the whiskey. It's just too much cask influence. So that's something that I think the bourbon cask, as Paul just said here, very well balanced, super long finish. I think that's where that balance actually comes from, is that blending of the two casks.
Yeah, it's that situation where everyone wants that sherry cask vibe, but when you have that older whiskey, you really have to be careful and balance that off. I've had a 29-year-old Speyside distillery that I won't name, and it was single sherry cask its whole life, and it came out tasting like Angostura bitters. It was heartbreaking because you don't want to waste whiskey. So yeah, having those bourbon cask is really good. Virgin casks as well can be a bit touchy because they are so green and astringent, and you don't want too much of that coming through. So yeah, bourbon casks, I mean, not only are they affordable for distillers, but they're also very good for those older maturation whiskies.
Something that when we were chatting with Emma tonight in terms of the order of tasting, usually the Bunna 25 is the one you drink right at the end, but there's so many, I guess, big bold flavors coming in the rest of the kit that we just wanted to make sure that you try this up, fairly early in the tasting, so you get some of those more subtle flavors, the balance, the complexities of this old refined whiskey to come through. So, but yeah, if you want, leave a little bit in your glass to the end, and you can always come back to it, after you've tried them all. But yeah, this is one of those refined whiskies that you don't want to have after a big heavy peated dram, because I think a lot of the unique flavors in here will just get, once your palate has been wiped, you'll miss it coming back to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. All those nuances tend to fade, and you have to, I always think about it a little bit too much, how I structure my whiskeys for the night to make sure that I'm, going up in flavor. And I was like, I want to make sure that the Bunny 25 isn't overpowered or, overshadowed, so that each whiskey can be enjoyed in its full capacity. But
while we jump on whiskey number 3, Paul and Elizabeth, they're impressed, smooth, refined, and sophisticated. So many people, when they've actually tried this, they say this is like the definition of a smooth whiskey. It's like the baseline. And it's a word that it's overused as a descriptor, but I completely agree. It's smooth, it's refined, it's sophisticated. It's a perfect tasting notes there.
Yeah, we need to replace smooth with quaffable. Just get all the English on it. All right, now I think this is the one most people have been waiting for. So the Glen Alecky 10-year-old batch number 4. So it won in the category of best Speyside single malt, and then it also won best single malt in the world. So the world's best single malt. So obviously an incredibly prestigious honor. Crazily enough, it has been many years since a Scottish distillery won this award. It's been Taiwanese, Australian, and Japanese whiskies in the meantime. I think the last one was an Old Pulteney, which you can barely get your hands on anymore. But yeah, so Glen Alecky Distillery, based in the Speyside, belonging to Billy Walker. So Billy Walker stepped in for Glendronach and Benriach distilleries and really revamped them, built them back up to the distilleries they used to be. And then he was like, all right, what's my next project? I'm done here, I've done my job. Brown-Forman is looking after them now. What's next? And so he went into Glen Alecky Distillery, which was, a little bit run down, not super, and it was used for blending. It was like, well, we just make this kind of clean base spirit and we use it for blending. Like, okay, all right. So Billy Walker stepped in and was like, nah, we're going to make this big, robust, insanely fruity spirit. It's going to be really cool. If you get to look at a bottle up close, actually, there's a reason for the Cro-Magnon font, as I like to call it, on the labeling, and that comes down to the rocky ridges and the location of the distillery. It's a very geological area, and actually, if you look really closely at the labels have this kind of funny pattern, and it's actually X-ray image, well, fine. Sorry if you can hear my cat. Fine imaging of rocks actually taken from the region and blown up so that they can make patterns of it on the bottles. But yeah, so 10-year-old batch 4. This is predominantly, sorry again, this is predominantly ex-bourbon cask as well, with quite a bit of heavy sherry casking, which I think comes through in those like really insane fruity notes. But yeah.
We can barely hear the cat on our side, Emma. It's just all you.
He's very talkative right now. He's decided to wake up from his nap and demand affection.
So if you can find a bottle, Marcus asked the price of this one. It's around $180. The winning batch 4, is pretty much sold out anywhere in the world. I think when these awards get announced, like you have 10 minutes to find stock anywhere in the world, because then people go gangbusters. But we recently did, I think, batch 5 or batch 6, even earlier this week. We had a few bottles left over. We did a ballot the other month as well. So we are getting more GlenAllachie into the country with the newer batches. So, and I think there's some widely available, some of the other indies online. So jump on the whiskey list and have a search if you like GlenAllachie. It's a alternative to Glendronach, basically. Big sherry based sort of, but they do other wood types as well. Fun distillery.
Yep. Yeah, super interesting. They recently released a series of really interesting casking, predominantly like red wine cask finish. So they had Grammatico, they had Rioja, they had one which I'm going to mess up the pronunciation of, which is Bulgare Superiore, which is a Tuscan red wine. So they're really getting into amplifying that fruit flavor through their casking, which is super interesting. And obviously Billy Walker being, an icon of the industry and really a pioneer for fun wood policies and stuff like that, has really made an impact on the spirit. Yeah. David, did you have anything you wanted to add to the GlenAllachie notes? Or
No, it's a million in the glass. It's just got that mouthfeel that just kind of coats your palate, just sits there for ages.
Yeah, it's so oily and chewy, and like it's almost like chewing. I don't know if any of you guys have had it, but big red gum from America, that like big cinnamon gum.
Yes.
Super interesting. Yeah. All right. Well,
we need somebody to give us their reviews of a lineup of the different batch numbers and compare them. Somebody must have a few. That's
someone out there must be collecting one of each. But yeah. So, world's best single malt for the year. Obviously, very exciting, very prestigious. But I think if everyone's ready, we might move on to the best French single malt for the year. So this one I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of as well. It's Armorik Yeun Elez. So this is a no age statement single malt from France. So it was originally founded by the Warrenhams. Again, please excuse my pronunciation. I failed French in high school. But yeah, so they started a distillery pretty much at the start of the 1900s, and they were making fruit liqueurs because that was a very big thing in France at the time. Everyone was making fruit liqueur or whatnot. And they were based inside the town of Lannion on the Brittany coast. So really, really beautiful seashore kind of vibes and whatnot. And then they brought on board a man named Lesoir, who kind of came in, revamped the distillery, and actually his descendant-in-law still owns the distillery and runs the distillery to this day. But they had to move outside of the town center, so they're no longer in their original spot. And that's actually kind of a common thing in France. So before about the 1950s, most French towns had a distillery or some kind of distillation running in them. And then the French government was like, actually, maybe it's not a good idea to have highly flammable liquids right near a large population of people. You need to scooch outside and move outside. So yeah, Armorik moved outside. And then in the 1980s, they were like, hey, let's make a single malt whiskey. They'd been, kind of toying and whatnot. And they'd been making blended whiskeys since about the late 60s. But yeah, they were like, well, everyone's big on this whole single malt phase, so let's make that. And then over the last decade or so, they've been really focusing on making peated whiskies. So this is actually lightly peated, which is super cool, super interesting. But yeah.
Is it lightly peated or heavily peated?
Oh, well, for me it's lightly peated, but I believe it's 50 ppm technically, but I find that when peat and barley can combine flavor wise, sometimes it just sometimes it works. Maybe I've been having too many octomores. Maybe that's it.
Peter Bignell from Belgrove Distillery down in Tasmania, there, who makes some really good peated rye whiskies. He explained, like, when you read parts per million ppm in terms of how smoky a whiskey is on a bottle, some distilleries measure before they go through the distillation process. Some do it at the bottling time, and it's very confusing for the consumer because, yeah, like a Lagavulin is kind of, or a Lafroig or something like that. They're quite highly peated whiskies, but their peat level, they measure it at the end of the process, while some other distilleries will say we have 100 ppm, but they do it at the beginning when the barley has been malted and smoked, basically. That instead of using other fuel types to stop the germination process, and that's where it gets a bit confusing. So it's an indication. It's not a true north measurement. So just have that in mind when we talk about ppm. Look up the ppm. It's highly available around different distilleries, but that 30 to 50 range is most of the Islay Scottish whiskies, the Ardbegs, etc., in that sort of range, if that makes sense. And then your Brookladdies with the octomore range, they'll go plus 100, and they do really crazy terms of peat levels, but that's hopefully explains a bit of the measurements behind it.
Yeah, it is always kind of hard to tell, like you were saying, when you get a peated whiskey, how peated is it going to be? And I find particularly with a lot of Australian whiskies, because like Australian distilleries will buy in peated malt, and they're like, okay, we're told it's 40 ppm, and then they distill it, and they're like, well, we don't have the stuff to measure it at the end of distillation, so let's just say it's heavily peated because that's what it came in as. And I think that's kind of what's happened with this one as well. Like, I think it's pretty spectacular. I really do get that like laundry fresh linen that's been like drying by a campfire, but just gently.
We've got a comment here around the age. So they label this as non-age statement. And but remember that in Scotland you have to legally say the age of the youngest whiskey in that blend. If you've blended a bunch of different casks together, you might have like Glenfiddich Snow Phoenix, which released I think about 5, 6, 8 years ago. They had casks that they were saying were 40, 50 years old and a 4-year-old Scotch as well, and they blended a whole bunch in together to come up with that whiskey. So technically it was labeled as a non-age statement. But it had really old stock and young stock in as well. So just something to be mindful of. Non-age statement doesn't always mean young whiskey. It just means that they're just not going to disclose it because it doesn't matter. Maybe it's a mix of different ages, and it's more around the flavor that they're trying to get across.
Yeah, 100%.
This could also be it certainly tastes more like inland, or what they call Highland peat in Scotland, not coastal peat. Hasn't got that iodine character. It's more like an Ardmore or a kind of an inland peaty, which also might be that kind of more subtle effect that we're getting. That isn't that salty briny character.
Yeah. But it's interesting to see how many distilleries are popping up in France, because obviously the French market is huge for whiskey. But you've got lots of little places popping up, including Uberac, which I think is a new one. Super interesting. Tastes like hot dogs.
Got a few questions from the audience. Huey asks, is ppm measured in a standard way in Scotland? That's what I was saying before. It's how it's measured, there's a special tool you can go in and define it, but some distilleries will measure the ppm at the end of the malting process. Some will do it at the bottling process after it's been distilled. This is why there's such a huge fluctuation in different ppms. But the way they measure parts per million, that's defined in standard, and you can go online and have a look at how they do that. And there's electronic tooling and all that now available for it.
Yeah, and it's parts per million of phenolic acid compounds that are in the liquid. So that phenolic acid, which comes from the peat, is responsible for, like, those phenols are responsible for that flavor. So you're really like counting how many of these compounds are in the liquid. So, yeah.
I don't actually know the price for this bottle. David, do you know the price of this one?
Nope. No idea.
Yeah, I think it's somewhat hard to get your hands on here in Australia. I believe there's others like Cornog, which are a little bit more accessible. But yeah, we don't see too much Armorik in Australia, unfortunately. Good old import being far away and all that.
Yeah, there's something like what there's 80 distilleries in France now, something like a crazy number.
Yeah.
I was just about to say, but Andreas got it in there before me. $130.
Nice.
Good price for this
Okay.
whiskey.
Yeah.
It's not bad. Yeah. It reminds me of a lot of like young Islay as well, like just chilled out though. Yeah. All right. Well, let's hop on to the next one. This is
Emma,
yes.
just before we go, I might actually talk about our next top shelf tasting quickly.
Go for it.
So this is obviously tasting number 2. The first one we did was, I've had a complete mind blank, the 30-year-old, sorry. So this one is obviously the World Whiskey Award winners. And the next one in our tasting, which goes on sale tonight, is around very old Cadenheads is the theme. So it's 6 grain whiskies that age from 26 to, I think, 34 years old. And we've priced it at $99 a kit. So that goes officially on sale at 7 p.m. But if anyone wants to grab a kit because you've attended one of our top shelf tastings tonight, there is the link to buy. So yeah, we only have 30 kits for these top shelf tastings available. Just because these bottles are so rare, we only break 2 bottles down and try and give everyone a decent amount. So if you're interested in our next one there, that's available now to buy before it goes to the general public at 9 o'clock tonight. But looking forward to the next one. That one will be at 4th of November, same time, it'll be 7:30 actually start for that one.
Yeah, should be really cool. Single grain whiskeys are awesome. All right. Well, Ledaig. If you don't like this, we can't be friends. Ledaig is my personal favorite distillery. Well, Tobermory Ledaig is. So it's the only whiskey producing distillery on the Isle of Mull, which is just kind of north of Islay. It's kind of like just directly up on the west coast of Scotland. It was one of the earliest commercial distilleries, actually, but because of just an atrocious string of ownership, it spent most of its life open, close, open, close, open, close, until 1992, 1993, when it was taken over by Burn Stewart, who are now Distill. But yeah, there was no like official, which one do we call this? So for a long time, you could buy a bottle of Tobermory and it would be heavily peated. And you're like, oh no, this is the Ledaig, or vice versa. So the original name of the distillery was Ledaig. It was founded by John Sinclair, and he named it Ledaig because it's Gaelic for safe haven. And if you've ever seen pictures of the town of Tobermory on Mull, it is the most beautiful little, it's so cute. They've got these painted houses. It's really, really like calm and beautiful. And then in 1992, just before Burn Stewart took over, they sent one of their employees down, and they were like, can you sort it out? Can you check it out? And so they went through the warehouse and they were like, is that peated? let's call it Ledaig. Is that unpeated? Let's call it Tobermory. And so that's why today we have this this very clear distinction between the two whiskies. So if it's Ledaig, it's from Tobermory. If it's Tobermory, it's from Tobermory. It's the same thing. But Ledaig is a heavily peated spirit, peated to, again, around 50 ppm, similar to Ardbeg and Laphroaig and Lagavulin and stuff like that. But because they've got this this funny S shape in the line arm of the still, which is where it recondenses to become alcohol again instead of alcohol steam, it really like gives it this creamy, oily like characteristic. And then of course you're aging it by the seaside, so you're getting that beautiful saltiness through. But yeah, it's honestly such a like cool little distillery, so kind of overlooked. So it's actually really exciting to see it, you know, get this award. This is the best Scottish island, not Islay whiskey award. Mouthful. And the funny thing is as well, the Tobermory 12-year-old came silver, was one of the silver whiskies as well. So, I mean, there's not a whole lot of choice islands-wise, but it is nice to see Ledaig Tobermory really getting that recognition, especially for their core stuff, which is just good. It's just good. I was sniffing this before and it smelled like honeyed ham, and I'm very excited to have my first sip.
There's more and more islands now. You've got Lewis and Harris, the Outer Hebrides, and don't know if everybody knows, but this is where Billy Walker kind of started out with Burn Stewart on with Tobermory and Deanston in the late 80s, if I remember. Yeah,
we are seeing more island distilleries kind of picking up as a category in Scotland. You know, you've got Arran opening their second distillery, Lag, which is where they're going to make all their heavily peated spirit. Obviously, you've got Orkney with Highland Park and Scap and whatnot. But yeah, we're starting to really get more of an appreciation for the islands outside of Islay. Yeah. Yeah, you can really see, because again, it is that mix of bourbon and sherry casking, but you can really see how this, especially compared to the Armorik, has that like rich body to it, mostly coming from that casking.
I love this tasting note from Andreas. Probably my favorite nose of any peated whiskey so far. I'm fairly new to peat. This whiskey is completely underrated. I think all the Cheggs are. And they're becoming more widely available as one of the other brands that we are bringing in, part of the Distell portfolio with Tobermory and Deanston and Bunnahabhain. But yeah, this Ledaig is the silent sort of a hero for us. David, you I think love this distillery as much as well, and Emma as well. So it's buy as much Ledaig in your life if you like smoky whiskey, because it is delicious.
But not too much, because leave some for me.
It's for me, it's more like a musty forest floor kind of peat. It's that earthiness, even like dusty cupboards. It's not that heavy in your face iodine island peat that some of the guys are familiar with. But it's it's just the balance is fantastic on all their releases.
Yeah, it's so much more approachable, I think, as well, than a lot of heavily peated whiskies. And I find when you have Ledaig matured in predominantly bourbon cask, I always like to describe it as a mechanic's workshop whiskey, because it has that like oily metallic thing to it, but it's creamy at the same time. And it's not dairy creamy, it's coffee creamer creamy. But yeah, when I came on board with the whiskey list and I heard, well, I've been joking for years, I talk so much about Ledaig, someone ought to pay me for it. So it works. But yeah, it's absolutely one of the most underrated distilleries, I think, in Scotland. Especially with, you know, they are coming out with these older age statements as well. And they do also a lot of really interesting casking as well. There's a no age statement Rioja, which is mind-blowingly spectacular. It's also conveniently the color of rosé, so if you want a wine glass of it, you can help yourself to a wine glass of it, keeping within RSA. But yeah, they do a lot of, you know, funky like port casking, Manzanilla casking, and stuff like that, especially with the Tobermory range, which is really cool.
Andreas finishes intoxicating would be his one-word review of this whiskey, the good kind, I mean.
Yeah.
And reading Paul's notes there, seaweed on the nose, but I agree with David that the palate is very reminiscent of the forest floor, very medicinal.
Yeah.
Yeah, good
Maybe
call.
Paul and I have spent too much time lying on forest floors.
Building moss angels.
What's everyone else think of this whiskey? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Okay.
Yeah.
It's always a good sign.
Yeah, it's awesome stuff. Yeah. All right. Well, on to the last dram of the night. This one is more local. So Adams Distillery from down in Tasmania. So this one won Best Australian Single Cask, Single Malt, if you thought the others were wordy. So with the World Whiskey Awards, they have their best single malt categories, and then they have their best single cask, single malt categories. So really kind of making it distinct, especially for people who are like, I love single casks, which are awesome, but, you know, also appealing to just the regular kind of expressions that you can get and that are equally as delicious. So Adams Distillery got its name for a reason. It was founded by two Adams. There's a lot of Adams involved in the building of the distillery. So one Adam is a former paramedic, one Adam is a builder. You'd think the builder was the bigger of the two, but if you ever get to meet them, the former paramedic Adam was also, I believe, like a weightlifting wrestling champion. He's huge, like huge, but one of those big friendly giant kind of guys. He literally, part of their maturation process at the distillery is they slosh the barrels. So essentially you physically rotating the barrels in order to get more contact between the liquid and the wood. And Big Adam does it by hand. Sometimes if he's feeling lazy, he'll get the machinery to do it. But I've watched him in front of my eyes pick up a 200-liter barrel full of whiskey and just tip it the other way around. It was insane. But yeah, so they're based on an old farm estate down in Tasmania, kind of about in the middle of the state. And it's absolutely beautiful. There are like sheep in the other paddock. It is beautifully rural. They have a cooperage on site called Transwood Cooperage. So definitely worth a visit because you can kind of see the whole process of the manufacture of whiskey from the barrel to the distillation and all that. And the Coopers there are a father and son duo who used to work for Bundahabhain. And they're very thrilled to be making 200-liter barrels because they're used to making tiny ones and large ones. And they're like, oh, it's easy. Bang out a 200-liter barrel. But yeah, going back to the Adams, you probably have heard of this distillery. There was quite a bit of a kerfuffle back last year. Actually, the distillery caught fire. Thankfully, the staff member involved is fine and doing well, but yeah, part of the distillery burnt down. They have been able to rebuild. It's fine, it's okay, but supporting them is definitely something that we want to do after an awful accident like that. But yeah, they predominantly focus on sherry cask whiskey. So when they started, they were like, all right, we don't want to half-ass this. We want to make sure that, you know, we are committing to making whiskey. They've got a huge still. They always intended to do peated expressions. Again, it's a peated port cask, but it's not necessarily as heavy peat as you'd be used to because it is, you know, not being measured as it comes off the still. It's being measured beforehand. But yeah, they use predominantly locally sourced, well, from the mainland of Australia, fortified wine casks, but they also source a lot of Spanish barrels as well. But yeah, so this is single cask. I believe it's 60% ABV. But yeah, it is really like rich and beautiful and sticky, I think is the best word to describe it.
61.
61, sorry.
Well, it's actually quite herbaceous.
Mm.
A bit of lavender I'm getting.
I was given a bottle of this before the awards one as a gift. I tried it. It was, I don't know, maybe freshly bottled, big punchy in the face. I drank some, shared it with friends. We drank it. We left half a bottle sitting there to oxidize. Came back 6 months later, and it is like one of the nicest like port whiskeys I've had in a long time. It's just completely mellowed out. The peat balance with the port. There's something, yeah, interesting happening down there, and the atoms are doing well.
Yeah, they I think their casking and the casks that they source are just really fantastic. Like I've got, if you do manage to get down there, there's this like tiny little bar that I think they've called the bar the Professor, after the man who, you know, gave them the estate to build the distillery on. But yeah, they've got these like tiny little bottles. Oh, I lost myself. I bought so many of them. But yeah, it's really picturesque, and the quality really is there, because they, you know, we're like, all right, we're not going to do this as a hobby. We're actually going to do this if we are making whiskey. So yeah, you can see that love and attention.
Marcus notes drop of water and they really opens up the nose.
Yeah, for sure.
Don't match nails on the nose. Completely agree. David says hits you in the face. I like it. Reminds me of charcoal grilling steak with some butter and herbs on top. Yeah, I get those vibes.
It's almost got that like baklava straight out of the oven with like the clove bits in it. Yeah.
Here's a random question. If you don't like food, then how are you meant to relate to whiskey with all these sort of, you know, food specific tasting notes? You'll be kind of like, it tastes like brown water. Yes.
I think that because smell and taste are so intertwined, it doesn't matter if it's not something you've tasted before. It could be something you've smelled before. I know that there's a whiskey I tried and I was like, this tastes like old knitted doilies on a toilet roll in your grandma's bathroom. And they were like, that's so strange. You've never licked one. I'm like, no, I've never licked one. But you know, you can connect those smells and those flavors, and it doesn't matter how weird it sounds. If it's something that you think it smells and tastes like, that is legitimate. Yeah.
Emma, I might launch a quick poll to see what the favorites are tonight.
Yeah, 100%. I'm curious to see.
Get voting. I know if you've got multiple favorites, just pick the one that's most favorite. Always curious to see what everyone thinks in the audience tonight. David Bates says the GlenAllachie, the best world whiskey for last year.
Oh, hello, my friend.
James, Bunna 25, GlenAllachie, very, very close. Andreas, I'm curious, what's your favorite? Lovely. Oh, Emma's favorite as well.
I think one of the questions I'm curious is that, are any of these not award worthy? Since they've all won major awards, now, are they, well, if they've won, does anybody think that any of them were not up to scratch?
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes back to the whole, like, it costs to be a part of these awards. So like how many insanely amazing whiskies are out there that just can't be bothered to pay to enter, you know?
And the major brands can't be bothered because they don't need to.
Yeah. But yeah, it's really interesting to see. I know that there was an awards a while ago, a couple of years back now, and I was like looking through the list of winners, and I was like, God, there's a lot of Glenmorangis and Ardbegs on this list. Like, I really love their Glenmorangis and Ardbegs. And I scrolled down, and it's like awards sponsored by Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy. I was like, so the owners. So yeah, I think that's why I always say, like, take awards with a grain of salt. You know, obviously the World Whiskey Awards are actually very prestigious, and they are, you know, very good representations of some of the best whiskies that have been submitted. The Australian Distilling Awards that are being judged now, I can confirm, I know the people who are judging, and they are experts. They're not afraid to be brutal, and it is all blind judging as well. So, you know, when it comes to Australian whiskies, they tend to be very, very reputable. So yeah,
that's the results. So the second whiskey we had, the Bunnahabhain 25-year-old, takes it out with 41% of the audience liking it, with the Glen Alecky and the Ledaig 18 equal second place.
Yeah, wow.
And unfortunately, the Adams did not stack up as high as some of the others around the world.
I think, Ollie, I think your assessment of it needing time is probably fair.
Yeah.
It honestly got better, but it needed, like, I just left it in the back of my whiskey shelf there, and I forgot about it, and I came back to it. I'm like, oh, let's try it again one day. And I was like, I'm impressed now. So it's one of those, sometimes whiskey needs time. Every whiskey is different.
Yeah, I think that's especially true of like a lot of single cask whiskies. You know, sometimes just leaving them is great. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it with some core range stuff. I once left a Lagavulin 16 out for a couple of hours, came back to it, and it was not good. Too much oxygen.
We're getting a nice debate here. Both the Taiwanese, the Kavalan, and the French one. Some people loved it. Some people, I love this kind of French should stick to wine. But they are the largest consumer of single malt whiskey in the world. So they do love their whiskey. And like David hinted before, there's about 80 distilleries making single malt whiskies under the Scottish sort of definition of what constitutes a whiskey in France. So yeah, we'll get more and more distilleries, you know, coming hopefully down under that we get to try, and good to see that the French category is growing. So it's not always the same, you know, 2 or 3 winners that the Taiwanese get. I think that one's a little bit, you know, unfair. It's always going to be 1 or 2 people. The Thurs distillery's only just started up, so
yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see as well how many of the best country single malts make their way to our Australian shores because of these awards. You know, there's an Egyptian whiskey, you know, was listed a couple of years back. I still haven't seen it or tried it, but I think it would be, you know, really great. And we're starting to see more Israeli single malts coming into the country as well. So it's really cool stuff.
I love this comment from Tom. Might have to continue the world's best tasting of the bottles I have here from the 2020 awards, with best blended, the Dewards 32, and the best rye, Archie Rose. So get into it, Tom.
Oh.
See, bottles are opening up there. I think we are pretty much done for time. That's great. 1 hour. If there's any last questions, put it into chat. Otherwise, we might call it a quick night. Just going through the comments quickly to see if there's any I've missed. Some good tasting notes there. It's always interesting to see what people think. The Distiller's Door whiskey kicks their rye malts ask. There you go. Archie Rose, New South Wales, and Rosebery. They their new distillery, I was one of the few lucky people in between the New South Wales lockdown to get a quick sneak peek of it. It is massive. I would describe it as 16 distilleries in one. They will be talking about it more over the coming months as it starts to open up. But what I mean by 16 distilleries is they can make 16 different gins or 16 different new make spirits at the same time and tweak the recipe, tweak the malting and everything, and then come up with a spirit at the end that they are proud of. And they can blend it or whatever they want to do at the end of it. And then they can even run multiple experiments. So one distillery may, do a recipe, put it in. You got to wait 2 years legally in Australia to call it whiskey. Then you taste the results. They can run 16 experiments at once and to keep tweaking it. So they don't want to be making millions of liters of whiskey like Scotch. They want to be, still craft, but they want to focus on getting the recipe right. A lot of experimentation, obviously big in their other spirits, their gins. They've just released a new Navy strength, the most gin ever produced in Australia, or the giniest gin. They describe it, great for cocktails. So take a look out for that. So don't write off Archie Rose if you had some of the earlier stuff and it was in your boat. I think they've got more exciting things to come. It's a sign of where the distillery is going and the investment that they've put in.
Yeah, and especially with staffing as well, over the last few years, they've really structured it. A friend of mine used to distill for them, and they actually don't have one master distiller. They have multiple distillers working on different products. So you're not really getting that like one person who's trying to make a gin and a vodka and a whiskey and a this and a that and overloading themselves. They really are, making sure that, the people looking after each style are, focused on that and, not distracted.
Reckon we'll see some cask experimentation from Archie Rose with their new distillery size. Yeah, there's so many different casks that they're experimenting. Every aspect of whiskey making, from the grain to how long they toast the malting, whether they smoke it, they're going to be champions of experimentation and very exciting to see what they're doing. Touring Manly Spirits tomorrow evening. We actually did the virtual tasting for Manly last week. 150 people almost in the room, everyone gangbusters for it. Enjoy your tour tomorrow, mate. It's a lot of fun. They have one of the coolest looking bars. It's very Manly-esque with the fish and the blue surfboard on the wall. It's if you're a local, you'll enjoy it. And the Pinot cask was one of the favorites of the night.
The ginger beer cask was great as well. It was like drinking very alcoholic ginger beer that's not carbonated. It was great.
All right. Well, I might call it quits in terms of because we're going to start. Yeah, we can just talk Manly Spirits all over again, but we'll leave that for the next tasting. I will paste the link in one more time for the next top shelf tasting. If you want to jump on, everyone's going to be notified in about an hour's time. So a few people already jumped on it. Otherwise, we'll see you at the next tasting. Lots to be announced in the coming weeks. For those who got a USA virtual whiskey show, me and David will see you in 2 days' time on Saturday at midday. The live stream starts. So on Facebook and YouTube. Otherwise, we'll see you all at the next tasting. Thank you, Emma and David, as well for co-hosting.
Thank you so much.
See you next time, guys. Bye.
See you later.
Have a good night, everyone.